Can Tesla continue on this exponential growth path over the next 10, 20, or more years? Let's talk about it. So let's take a look at Tesla and the current growth path that it's on, and let's do some comparisons to see where the opportunities are, where some of the risks might be, and what could possibly happen in the future. So here's the graph of Tesla I showed at the beginning of this video, and you can see that it's on a very nice exponential growth path here. That's what this dotted line is. This is the exponential trend line for the stock from its IPO date. If you look at what this line means, it means that Tesla is going to basically 2.5x every 2 years, or that's roughly 1.55 times every year. So 55%, 55% growth rate. That's phenomenal. So how do we determine if this is reasonable? Can it continue doing this, or is it going to fail, or is it going to increase its slope? Well, let's take a look at some other stocks, how they've performed over many decades to see if we can make some sense of all this. So first up, let's take a look at IBM. Why IBM? Well, it's kind of in the technology space, not in the way that more modern technology companies are, but IBM has been a technology research-oriented company for many, many decades. In fact, you can see from this graph for over 60 years. And what has that looked like? Well, over that 60 years, it's had different CEOs, different executive management teams, different directives, but it appears to me that IBM has a fairly good culture that keeps it on this path. And you can see that it has wiggled around this exponential growth line. Now, it's not as steep as Tesla's, but in fact, it's a 7% annual rate of return on average over the 60 plus years. But you can see that it's held that line pretty well. This tells me that IBM has a pretty solid culture that's going to function regardless of the management. Let's take a look at another company, a really boring company called Procter & Gamble. So, God, younger people would never even think of putting Procter & Gamble in their portfolio. But actually, Procter & Gamble has outperformed IBM. The slope is higher here. And you can see that back here in the early days, Procter & Gamble performed about the same as IBM, and then something happened here where they kind of departed. So you can see that Procter & Gamble departed here from IBM and started on a higher growth rate, and over the entire 60-year period has had a higher growth rate than IBM. Let's take a look at another boring stock, Coca Cola, KO, and you can see that it has even a higher growth rate than Procter & Gamble. And now for more modern comparison, let's throw Apple in here. Now, Apple hasn't been around for 60 years, but you can see that over the period that Apple has existed, it has a higher growth rate than Coke, Procter & Gamble, or IBM. And there's a lot of wiggles in here. So you can see this has not been as stable as any of these other three. It's had different slopes throughout its history. So let's take a look at what happened during those time frames and what we can learn and how that might apply to Tesla. So the first thing you're going to notice here is, and if you know the history of Apple, Steve Jobs left Apple very early after the IPO. And you can see that the stock rallied. Scully came in, took over to run the company, and apparently the market thought that was a good thing. And then it kind of went nowhere for over almost a decade. And then finally, I guess the Apple board decided that Scully wasn't going to make it go, and they decided to bring Steve Jobs back. Well, you can see that after they brought Steve Jobs back, the stock still continued to go down because the market obviously didn't think it was a good thing for Steve Jobs to be running the company back here. But then the stock started to take off. Now, what happened in these periods where the stock really took off? And then we'll talk about Steve Jobs leaving Apple here a little bit later. But let's take a look at what happened here. Well, right here, the iPod was introduced. And you can see right after the iPod was introduced, the stock just took off and really went up. And this slope, by the way, is much higher than the slope that Tesla is currently on. And then the iPhone was introduced here, and the stock continued going higher. But then Steve Jobs started to look a little sickly. He didn't show up for Macworld. And you can see the stock tanked here because people recognized that his health was at risk. And then later on, Steve Jobs passes away about this time frame. Let's take a look at the slopes over these different periods to see how the stock performed. So first of all, after bringing Steve Jobs back, you can see that the overall slope here was higher than the slope over the entire period of Apple, which makes sense because Apple was doing some serious innovation and product introductions here that were groundbreaking. And if you look at just that period when they introduced the iPod and the iPhone, the slope is really high. This is like rocket ship. This is way higher than Tesla's growth. But then what happened after Steve Jobs passed away? Well, then the slope moderated. So what does this tell me? Well, this tells me that Apple still has a very good and innovative culture. They've got a great product mix, but they're missing some of the juice that Steve Jobs brought when he took the company into these two very innovative products and the stock price just launched. So what other companies can we learn from? Well, let's take a look at Microsoft. Well, Microsoft, and we'll look at this later, this initial slope that Microsoft was on was actually a little bit higher than Tesla. And what happened? Well, Bill Gates stepped down as a CEO and put Ballmer in place. And let's take a look at what happened over that period. So here's the initial slope that Microsoft was on, which is higher than Tesla's slope. It's pretty close, but it's a bit higher. Then Ballmer came in place, and you can see the stock went nowhere to down. And then Ballmer got replaced by Nadella, and now the stock is on a fairly nice slope again. In fact, it's about on par with what Apple is running. So they're kind of neck and neck here. So how does all of this apply to Tesla? Well, let's take a look. So you can see here, Tesla is on a very nice slope. We talked about this earlier. Microsoft was actually on a higher slope rate here if I draw this line out and go up. And Apple, we talked about in great detail. So what could happen at Tesla? Well, we know they're doing very well in electric vehicles and in solar and batteries for power generation and storage. And we know they have a very strong roadmap going forward. They're going to introduce the Tesla Cybertruck, the Tesla semi-truck, the Roadster, the Robotaxi with full self-driving. They have the humanoid robot on the map. They have artificial general intelligence, which they're going to have to solve if they're going to do the humanoid robot. They can potentially be a utility company, which they're already approved for in Texas. So there are some huge S-curve markets in front of them that, if they execute well, can cause this company to actually outperform its current trajectory. So let's take a look at what that might look like here. Here we have Apple at a 19% overall growth rate over this period. We have Tesla at a 54% compound annual growth rate. We have IBM at 7%. We've got Microsoft at 26%, and we have Amazon at 33%. So what could happen if Tesla executes well on the roadmap, with or without Elon Musk? Well, if they execute well, and these markets are really huge S-curve markets, the stock could actually start going up even faster, which would be this case. But what happens if Elon Musk leaves the company, or hopefully not, but dies, and the culture isn't as strong as I think it is, and they don't execute as well as they do under Elon Musk? Then the growth of the stock could moderate, just like Apple's did after Steve Jobs passes away. So what have we learned from this? Well, we've learned that companies have events that have real impact on the stock prices. You could see that in Apple. You could see that in Microsoft. You could see it in a boring company like IBM or Procter & Gamble or Coke, where there were clearly events that happened. I didn't get into all the history, where the stock performed better or worse, but over a 60-year period had a pretty consistent growth rate. In the case of Tesla, we don't know. We do know they have a great product roadmap. We do know they've got a great culture of innovation, of doing whatever it takes to get roadblocks out of the way and solve problems and make things happen. Will Elon Musk leaving have an impact on that? We won't know until or if that happens. And will these new markets cause the stock to go up even faster? We won't know until that happens. And there's another little known fact that people don't talk about. Tesla has a huge cult following, not just in terms of their products, but in terms of the stock as well. And what happens when you have that kind of cult following? Well, people buy the stock and they don't sell it. They typically only buy more. And there are a lot of retail investors who are in that camp, where they're buying Tesla stock, they keep buying more, and they aren't selling it. If you think about it, that's a de facto stock buyback program. Yeah, it has the risk of people eventually selling it, but as long as that stock's being held and not sold, it's reducing the available supply, which is great for Tesla investors. I'm Calvin Rose, and thank you for watching today. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification icon. That's all for now. Hey, thank you for watching. If you enjoy these videos, there's several ways on Patreon for you to support the channel and access exclusive content, including special posts on the markets, educational materials about how to select investments and manage your portfolio. And at the investor level, you'll have full access to our natural selection stock rankings, so you can evaluate individual stocks or market sectors that fit your investment style. Check out the link at the pinned comments below, and thank you for your support.